At Thanksgiving dinner, the silverware clinked and the air smelled of roasted turkey when my mom leaned across the table with that sharp smile she always saved for me. "Harper," she mocked, "are you still driving that old truck?" My brother Mason burst out laughing, shaking his head like I was the family punchline. The table joined in, and for a moment, I felt 12 years old again, overlooked, dismissed, and labeled as the plain daughter with no ambition. They thought that truck defined me, proof I was stuck, small, and ordinary. What they didn't know was that the old truck wasn't a limitation, it was camouflage. Behind it, I'd spent years building something no one in that room ever bothered to ask about. A company, a fortune. And tonight, while they laughed at me over mashed potatoes, I decided to finally show them who I really was. Growing up, it was never hard to see who the favorite child was. Mason, my younger brother by 5 years, could have burned the house down, and somehow my parents would have praised him for being spirited. He was the golden boy, the one with charm that dazzled relatives at reunions and teachers at school. Mason could talk his way out of trouble, skip assignments, fail tests, and still be treated like the family prodigy. Me? I was the quiet one. I did my homework on time, kept my grades up, never caused drama, and followed the rules. You'd think parents would be proud of a kid who stayed out of trouble, but in my house, being reliable was boring. Being steady meant being invisible. While Mason's antics filled dinner table conversations, my achievements earned little more than a distracted, "That's nice, Harper." The difference became clearer as we got older. When I graduated high school, I had two choices: take out massive loans to go to college like Mason planned to, or start working and building experience in the logistics company where I had a part-time job. My parents practically begged me to follow Mason's path. "A real education will open doors," my mom said. "Don't waste your potential loading trucks," my dad warned. Mason, meanwhile, was praised for choosing communications, which in reality was just an excuse to party for 4 years. But I wasn't afraid of work. I wasn't afraid of starting small if it meant building something real. So I chose the warehouse over the dorm room. I studied shipping routes instead of lecture notes, asked questions about fuel costs instead of fraternity dues, and volunteered for every extra shift I could get. To my parents, that meant I'd settled for less. To me, it was the foundation of something bigger. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the way my family looked at me. Mason strutted into family dinners with stories about his fraternity parties or the amazing startup internship he barely showed up for. My parents listened with shining eyes, convinced he was destined for greatness. When it was my turn to share, they smiled politely and quickly turned the spotlight back to him. I wasn't the star of my own story, I was the background character in Mason's. They had no idea that every overlooked shift, every night I drove home in that beat-up truck, was adding up to something they would one day be forced to recognize. When I first walked into the warehouse as a full-time employee, I could almost hear my parents' disappointment echoing in the back of my mind. To them, I had officially sealed my fate as the daughter who never aimed higher. My mom told the neighbors I was helping out with deliveries. My dad muttered to relatives that I was figuring things out. Meanwhile, Mason was introduced as our son, the future businessman. But what my parents dismissed as a dead-end job became my classroom. I started at the very bottom, sorting packages, sweeping loading docks, handling paperwork no one else wanted. Instead of complaining, I observed everything. I noticed how certain drivers wasted fuel, how late shipments ruined customer trust, how small inefficiencies stacked into big losses. Every mistake around me was a free lesson in how the industry really worked. I asked questions constantly. Why was Route A always backed up on Mondays? Why did certain clients request specific drivers? Why did equipment fail so often? Some supervisors rolled their eyes at my curiosity, but others saw that I wasn't just punching a clock, I was learning. Soon, I was volunteering for overtime, filling in for absent dispatchers, even training myself on bigger rigs during slow weeks. Within 2 years, I wasn't just another warehouse worker, I was trusted enough to manage dispatch schedules. Within 4, I was overseeing regional routes. By the 6th year, I was operations manager, pulling in a salary that Mason couldn't dream of with his endless string of internships and business ventures. Yet at home, none of this mattered. At Thanksgiving, my mom would still pat my hand and ask if I was making enough to get by. My dad would sigh and tell me I should think about going back to school. Mason, of course, showed up with leased cars and flashy suits, and they praised him like he was already CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I remember one family barbecue where Mason laughed, beer in hand, and said, "Harper, when are you going to get a real car? That truck looks like it belongs in a junkyard." My parents chuckled as if it were the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I just smiled and changed the subject. Because while they laughed, I was saving every dime, building every skill, and quietly laying the groundwork for a future they couldn't begin to imagine. They thought I was stuck. In reality, I was getting ready to leave them all behind. By the time I turned 28, I knew I'd hit the ceiling where I was. The company had been good to me, I'd learned everything from the ground up, but the higher-ups weren't about to hand over real power to someone like me. Not a woman, not without a fancy MBA, not when they had their own sons and nephews to groom for leadership. I remember one board meeting where I presented a plan to streamline mid-range delivery routes. It could have saved the company thousands each quarter. They nodded politely, thanked me, then turned to a 24-year-old management trainee to ask his thoughts. He shrugged, repeated one of my points in fancier words, and suddenly he was the one being praised. That was the moment I realized I'd never be more than useful background noise to them. So I made a choice. I called Danny, an old colleague who had been driving rigs for 15 years and knew every shortcut, way station, and gas stop between Maine and Florida. Danny wasn't flashy, but he was sharp, dependable, and, most importantly, he believed in me. Over coffee in a dingy diner, I laid out my plan. A small transport company that treated drivers like partners, not disposable assets. Fair pay, reliable equipment, efficient routes, and relationships built on trust, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Danny grinned. "I'm in, but we'll need a truck." So we pooled our savings, took out a modest business loan, and bought a used Peterbilt. That one truck was the start of H.D. Transport. Harper, Danny. Our first year nearly broke us. We slept in truck cabs, lived off gas station coffee, and worked 18-hour days just to keep afloat. More than once, I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But, little by little, things changed. Shippers appreciated that we showed up on time and delivered what we promised. Drivers noticed that we paid fairly and actually maintained the rigs. Word spread. By month 10, we were breaking even. By year 2, we had 3 trucks. By year 4, 8. And by the time I hit 33, we were running 15 trucks with 25 employees and contracts that kept us booked solid year-round. And my family? They still thought I was just the girl with the old truck. At dinners, when my mom asked how work was going, I'd say busy, and leave it at that. My dad would nod vaguely before turning the spotlight back to Mason's latest big opportunity. Nobody asked specifics. Nobody cared. To them, I was still the boring one who never aimed high. That was fine by me. Because, while Mason was chasing shiny dreams that crumbled within months, I was quietly building an empire on wheels. And one day, that empire was going to roll right up to their front door and leave them speechless. By my early 30s, the company was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. We had contracts lined up months in advance, reliable drivers who trusted us, and a reputation for dependability in an industry known for cutting corners. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel stable, I felt powerful. That's when I started looking for a home. Not an apartment, not a starter house. I wanted something that reflected the years of sacrifice, the 18-hour days, the nights Danny and I spent wondering if we could keep the lights on. I wanted something that would stand as proof not just to myself, but to anyone who had ever doubted me that I had made it. I found it on a quiet stretch of land just 20 minutes from the town where I grew up. A sprawling colonial estate sitting on 12 acres, complete with a pool, 5 bedrooms, vaulted ceilings, and a kitchen straight out of a magazine. The price tag? $1.3 million. I didn't blink. I wired the money straight from my business account. No mortgage, no debt, just clean ownership. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty foyer, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, and I laughed. I thought about every time Mason had rolled his eyes at my truck, every time Mom had sighed about me, settling, every time Dad had urged me to be more like my brother. They thought I was barely scraping by. And here I was, holding the deed to a house worth more than anything they'd ever imagined. But I didn't tell them. Not yet. Danny and a few of the guys from work helped me move in. That first weekend, we grilled steaks on the back patio, looking out over the rolling hills. Danny clapped me on the shoulder and said, "They have no idea who you've become, do they?" I smiled. Not a clue. But they're going to find out. I could have announced it right then. I could have sent my parents a picture of the house, let Mason choke on the reality that his unsuccessful sister had just bought a mansion in cash. But where was the fun in that? No. I wanted the reveal to be perfect. I wanted it to happen on a night when they least expected it, when the contrast between their assumptions and the truth would hit hardest. Thanksgiving was coming. A dinner table where my mom loved to poke at me, where Mason loved to brag, where I was always the afterthought. This time, I was going to turn the entire script upside down. I didn't know exactly how it would play out, but one thing was certain. By the end of that night, they would never look at me the same way again. Thanksgiving that year started the same way it always did, with Mason making a grand entrance. He pulled up in his leased BMW, the kind that cost more per month than most people's rent, and strolled into the dining room wearing an expensive suit like he was heading to a board meeting. My parents beamed at him as though the president himself had walked through the door. I slipped in quietly behind him, wearing my usual jeans and boots, keys from my old pickup jingling in my hand. My mom's eyes landed on me, and right on cue, she smirked. "Still driving that old truck, Harper?" she teased, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mason chuckled, shaking his head. "Sis, it's embarrassing. Don't you think it's time to upgrade?" The table erupted in laughter. I smiled faintly, cutting myself a piece of turkey. Let them laugh, I thought. Tonight was going to end differently. Dinner carried on, and Mason could hardly contain himself. He pushed the mashed potatoes aside, cleared his throat dramatically, and raised his glass. "I have some exciting news to share with all of you," he began, eyes sparkling. My mom clasped her hands together, already tearing up with pride. Dad leaned forward, eager. "I've found my calling," Mason announced. "I'm launching a new business importing handcrafted goods from South America. Pottery, textiles, jewelry. Unique, authentic, high-end. The market is untapped, and the profit margins are enormous." The reaction was immediate. My aunt gasped. My uncle raised his glass. My mom actually cried. Questions poured in. "Who are your suppliers? What boutiques will you target?" Mason ate it up, pulling out his phone to show glossy photos of colorful pottery and woven fabrics. "The initial investment is significant," he admitted, pausing for effect. "But with a little capital, the returns will be life-changing." My father's chest swelled with pride. "And we believe in him so much," he declared, "that we're backing him as his lead investors." The table fell silent for a beat. I looked up sharply. "Investors?" Mom dabbed at her eyes, smiling through tears. "We took out a home equity loan. $120,000. Mason's business plan is solid, it's finally his time." I set my fork down, my pulse spiking. They'd risked their house, their retirement, for Mason's latest shiny scheme? Around me, the family buzzed with excitement, clinking glasses, offering congratulations. Mason basked in the attention, grinning like a king. My parents glowed with pride, convinced they were on the ground floor of something extraordinary. No one looked at me. No one asked my opinion. To them, I was still the quiet daughter with the rusty truck, good for polite smiles and little else. But inside, I was boiling. I had stayed silent through years of dismissals, endured every laugh at my expense. Tonight, though, I wasn't just going to correct the record. I was going to shatter their illusions in one clean strike. And I knew exactly when to do it. The room was buzzing after Mason's announcement. My mother kept squeezing his hand as though he'd just cured cancer. My father raised his glass again, proclaiming, "To Mason, the future of this family." I sipped my wine quietly, letting the noise wash over me. It was almost funny how quickly they forgot about me sitting there. How easily they bought into Mason's glossy story, blind to the cracks right beneath the surface. Finally, when the laughter settled, I cleared my throat. Actually, I have some news too. The words hung in the air like smoke. Forks froze mid-air. Mason barely glanced up from his phone. Oh? What is it? Harper finally trading in that truck? A ripple of laughter passed around the table again, but it died quickly when I spoke. I bought a house, I said evenly. My mother smiled absently, still half distracted by Mason. That's nice, dear. Where? I set my glass down and met her eyes. Riverside Estates. The clatter of silverware hitting plates was deafening. Conversation stopped. My father blinked. You mean the Riverside Estates? Those homes start at 800,000. Mason laughed, but it was strained. You mean like a condo, right? They have some affordable units there. Not a condo, I corrected. A house, 6 bedrooms, 12 acres, paid cash. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. My mother's wineglass stalled halfway to her lips. My father's jaw tightened. Mason's smirk faltered, then vanished altogether. That's not possible, Mason muttered. You drive trucks. You don't have that kind of money. I reached into my bag and slid my phone across the table, the real estate listing glowing on the screen. Photos of the estate, gleaming kitchen, sunlit living room, sprawling backyard lit up their shocked faces. My father leaned forward, voice low. Harper, how? I held his gaze, steady and calm. I own a company, H.D. Transport, 15 trucks, 25 employees, 7 million in annual revenue. Built it from the ground up over the past 6 years. My mother gasped. What? Mason's face drained of color. You're lying. I smiled faintly. No, Mason. I just never bothered explaining because no one ever asked. Every time you mocked my truck, every time you changed the subject when I mentioned work, you didn't want to know. So I stopped trying to tell you. The questions came like gunfire after that. How long had I owned a company? Why hadn't I told them? What exactly did the business do? I answered each one, calm and precise, while Mason grew redder with every detail. Finally, he snapped. This is bullshit. You're making this up to steal my moment. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Steal your moment? Mason, I've been building my future for over a decade while you've been chasing fantasies. I didn't steal anything. You just never noticed. My father's face was pale now, my mother's eyes wet. Mason slammed his fist on the table. Prove it! So I did. I showed them bank statements, company registrations, photos of my fleet with my logo on the doors. Every piece of evidence drove the knife deeper into Mason's pride. The boy they had worshipped as their shining star was suddenly sitting in the shadow of the sister they'd dismissed all her life. And judging by his clenched jaw and trembling hands, Mason knew it too. The silence around the table was heavy, almost suffocating. My parents were still processing the reality that I wasn't the disappointment they'd always assumed. Mason, however, wasn't about to surrender the spotlight so easily. You're exaggerating, he spat, his face flushed. Even if you do have some trucks, you're not that successful. Not compared to me. I'm building something real. I tilted my head, my voice calm. Real? Mason, what exactly do you have? A half-baked import plan and 120, zero of mom and dad's money tied up in it. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother reached for her wine again. Mason's jaw clenched. It's called leveraging. Every entrepreneur takes risks. I leaned forward. Leveraging is when you borrow responsibly, with assets to back it up. You're drowning in debt and calling it ambition. Mason's eyes widened. You don't know what you're talking about. That's when I pulled out my phone and opened an app. Actually, I do. I ran a background credit check. Standard practice in my industry before partnering with anyone. The color drained from his face. Your student loans still sit at nearly 70, zero. Your credit cards? Over 40, zero maxed out. Your precious BMW? 18,000 left on the lease. And that's not even counting the smaller personal loans. Total? About $130,000. The room froze. Forks clinked softly against plates as hands trembled. My mother's eyes went wide with shock. My father's face flushed deep red. Mason shot to his feet. "That's private," he barked, his voice cracking. "You had no right." "Private?" I countered, my tone sharp. "You stood here tonight asking them to stake their home, their future, on your big idea, all while hiding the truth about your financial disaster. That's not privacy, Mason. That's fraud." My father's hands curled into fists on the table. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Mason stammered. "It's not debt, it's leverage, I told you. It's all part of the plan." "The plan?" I cut him off. "You've never stuck with a job longer than 8 months. You've burned through internships, startups, and schemes like matches. And now you've dragged them into your mess. You didn't want investors. You wanted a bailout." The silence was deafening. My aunt's fork clattered to her plate. My uncle shook his head in disgust. My mom's lips trembled. "Mason, tell me she's wrong." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes darted, searching for a lifeline. "I just needed a chance. This business is different." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "That's what you said about the tech startup, about the wellness company, about the dropshipping store, about crypto, about every single disaster you left behind while they cheered you on and laughed at me." My father's voice was low, seething. "You let us take out a home equity loan on our house for this?" Mason's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "I thought I could make it work. I thought—" I cut in, sharper than ever. "You thought wrong. And now they're paying the price." My mother covered her face with her hands. My father looked as though he'd aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. Mason stood trembling, his suit suddenly looking more like a costume than a badge of success. For the first time in my life, the golden boy had been stripped bare, exposed for exactly what he was: reckless, entitled, and broke. And I? I wasn't the overlooked sister anymore. I was the one who had finally forced everyone at that table to see the truth no matter how much it hurt. The table was a graveyard of silence. Turkey sat cold on plates, the candles flickered, and Mason's grand performance had collapsed into dust. My parents looked shattered, staring at the son they had always put on a pedestal and realizing the foundation had been built on lies. Finally, my father spoke, his voice rough. "Harper, what do we do now? The money's gone. We owe the bank. We could lose the house." I took a deep breath. For years, I had kept my head down. Let them underestimate me. Let Mason carry the family's hopes on his shaky shoulders. But this was different. They were in real danger. And whether they deserved it or not, I wasn't going to let them drown. "I'll cover the loan," I said firmly. "All of it. Tomorrow, I'll wire the money to pay off the debt. You won't lose the house." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Harper, we don't deserve this. After the way we treated you." I held up a hand. "This isn't about deserving. It's about protecting what you worked your whole lives for." "But," I added, turning my gaze to Mason, "there will be conditions." Mason bristled, color flooding back into his cheeks. "You can't control me." "Actually," I said evenly, "if I'm bailing out Mom and Dad because of you, then yes, I can. Either you sign over financial power of attorney to me and follow a strict repayment plan, or you declare bankruptcy and live with the consequences. No more handouts, no more schemes. Real work, real accountability." The room went still. Mason's jaw worked furiously, but he didn't speak. My father leaned forward, eyes like steel. "She's right. If Harper saves this house, you'll do exactly what she says," Mason exploded. "This is insane. She's been hiding her success just to humiliate me. She's not better than me, she's just lucky." I laughed sharp, humorless. "Lucky? Mason, I spent 15 years working 12-hour days, sleeping in truck cabs, building something real while you were chasing shortcuts. That's not luck, that's effort. Something you've never had the patience for." My mother reached out, gripping my hand with trembling fingers. "We're so sorry, Harper. We should have seen you. We should have asked. We should have cared." Her voice cracked, but I didn't let the emotion sweep me away. "Not yet." I kept my eyes on Mason. "Your choice. Sign or walk away. But if you walk, don't ever ask them or me for another dime." For a long moment, he just stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting from face to face. Then, slowly, grudgingly, he sat down and scribbled his signature on the papers I slid across the table. The golden boy had fallen. The next morning, I transferred 120, zero to my parents' account, wiping the debt clean. Their house was safe. That evening, I moved Mason into a modest studio apartment near one of my distribution centers. I had already arranged a job for him, a warehouse associate. Starting pay, 16 an hour. The same job I had once started with. He hated it. Every day, he complained about the hours, the physical labor, the lack of prestige. But for the first time, he was learning what real work looked like. And whether he lasted or not, the message was clear. The free ride was over. As for my parents, something changed after that night. They asked about my business, visited my office, met my employees. For the first time since I was a teenager, they looked at me not with pity but with pride. It was bittersweet. I had spent half my life waiting for their approval, only to realize I no longer needed it. What mattered was that I had built something solid, something no one could laugh away. That Thanksgiving dinner had started with their laughter echoing in my ears. It ended with their silence and my truth filling the room. And from that day forward, nobody in my family ever mocked my old truck again.